Yeah, so I want to start by sharing a story, a scene that I saw 13 years ago. Yeah, I was in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, in a general hospital because my 2-year-old daughter had to undergo an emergency surgery because of a very bad accident in Genting. Right, so beside our bed was a young girl, about 8 to 9 years old, and I got to understand that she had cancer, and she was there for a long-term hospital stay. Right? She was very quiet. She kept to herself most part of the day. But every morning when breakfast is served, she would flash the biggest smile. And the breakfast is just like one slice of bread, one hard-boiled egg. Right? Something that in Singapore we were like, really? Yeah. But she would flash the biggest smile when breakfast is served. And she would then quickly eat up her bread, open a drawer, and then take out a set of markers, and then she would draw on the egg and decorate it. And then some days she will peel it, and then she'll eat it. Some days she will give it to another child in the ward to cheer the child up. Right? And she was not in a good situation. She had no health. She had a terminal illness. She had no toys. She had no smartphone. But she used what she had in her hands, something simple, and she made it into something beautiful to bless others. That day, the girl taught me a lot. Right? And in the Bible, similarly, there are many lessons of how God uses those who avail something simple in their hands to bless others, and God used those in a big way. Right? And today, that's why I titled my sharing, My Hands, God's Plans. Right? And the big idea is that God can use what is in our hands for His greater plans, irregardless how small that thing is in our hands. Right? And we start with the first point. Don't despise what is in your hands. I think in order for God to use what is in our hands, I think we need to learn not to despise what is in our hands. I think if we can't do that as a first step, it's then very difficult for God to use us. Right? And we start by looking at the first passage in the Bible, Exodus 4, 1 to 5. And we look at 1 to 3 first. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me, or listen to me, or say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of the fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." So this passage is straight after Exodus 3, where God appeared to Moses in a burning bush. And God asked Moses to take up the lead and lead the people of Israel out of Egypt. And Moses' first reaction is probably similar to what we will all say. Right? He says, no, who am I to do that? I'm not good enough. What if they don't listen to me? What if they don't believe me? Right? And verse 2, like we read just now, is God's exact answer to Moses, "I'm not good enough." God asked Moses, "What is that in your hand?" Right? God asked Moses to look at his hand because God can use what is in Moses' hand for big things. And God could have given Moses a king's scepter, right? A symbol of power and authority. But God didn't do so. God chose to use Moses' staff, a very old rugged wood, a stick that Moses used to guide the sheep. And God chose that. Right? And similarly, and so the many, many years that Moses spent looking after sheep was not useless. The many, many years that Moses spent looking after sheep put into Moses' hands something that God could really use. And similarly, God can use us in our job, our skills, our talents, and God has consistently showed that in the Bible. Even if you think, my skill is so small, I can't do much in church other than shaking hands in front as usher. But God can use all of that. And God has shown that consistently in the Bible. Right? He used David's small stones, David's simple slinging skill, and killed a giant. God used Samson to use just a small jawbone of a donkey and defeated thousands of enemies. God used the small boy's 5 loaves and 2 fishes and fed thousands and thousands. So God has consistently showed that He can use small things in a big, big way, right? And I think it's important. Can I move to the next slide? Yeah. It's important that we recognize that we are God's handiwork, right? We ourselves are nothing. But because we are God's handiwork and we are created in God's image, there is greatness in our hands. And I think we very often forget about it. I constantly have to remind myself that don't despise what is in my hands. Right? Focus on what I have, not what I don't have. Right? The fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else or compare it to somebody else. And then think, I think cannot. Right? But actually, God really wants us to just be willing to avail that something small to Him, and He can really use it in a very big way. So I think that's the first thing I've been trying to learn and trying to remind myself that I really need to learn not to despise what is in my hands. And when I can do that, then I can move on to committing what I have to God's hand. Because whatever I have, however much I have, I know it's enough. It's enough because God is powerful enough to use that little bit in a bigger way. All right? And that then leads me to my second point. When we can learn not to despise what we have, then we can learn to commit our hands to the Lord. And when we commit our hands to the Lord, we learn to trust that God has the best timing and the best plan for us. And once we have that trust, we are able to step forth into our plan more easily, right? This verse, I think many of us in our small group, when we share, which is our favorite verse in the Bible, this was one of the favorite verse of many of ours, Jeremiah 29:11. Right? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And this verse has given me a lot of peace through my life because I grew up in a very uncertain environment. Right? I grew up not knowing whether next day there's food on the table. Right? And because I think I've shared in my previous sharing, my dad is a gambling addict. My parents are not educated. He doesn't have a stable job. And as a gambler, their mentality is this: if I win a little bit, then I will bet. I'll put everything back in to win bigger. Right? So very often he will come home with like zero, nothing at all in his pocket. So my mom will have this drawer where she hides some coins. And when my dad is not around, every morning she will go to that secret drawer and take out 150-cent coin. Right? And I can remember this very clearly because actually a few years back in a church camp, in a Maranatha church camp during worship, God actually showed me this scene. And this scene actually was of my childhood, where every day, after my mom gave me that 50-cent coin, I would clench it very tightly, and my job was to walk to the Red Hill Market and buy a packet of the 50 cents nasi lemak, banana leaf, ikan bilis, peanut, that kind of ikan bilis peanuts, right? 50 cents. So God showed me the scene where I was just walking to the market because I do that every day. And I always clench it so tight because I know if I accidentally drop that 50 cents and it's somewhere in a drain that I cannot retrieve it, then that's it. That day my mom and I wouldn't have any food. Right? And I also realized why I didn't realize when I was young why my mom always said, she's very full, she doesn't really want to eat the nasi lemak, because actually she wanted me to have the nasi lemak because the two of us shared that packet. Right? So God showed me that scene where I walk every day, right, clenching the 50 cents very tightly. But in that scene during the church camp, during the worship, God showed me that I was not walking alone. Actually, Jesus was walking beside me with his arm outstretched and just very gently guiding my shoulder. Right, so I know that even when I was young, when I didn't know that Jesus is walking beside me, actually he was already walking along with me. Right? And because of that, I do know that when I commit whatever I have to the Lord, and at that point, it doesn't seem like anything is being answered, right? It's just hard and tough, but actually God is with me. Right? And even as I was moving into my university, and there's no way my family could afford my university, the Lord led me to pick up the Chinese newspapers one day. Because I never read the newspapers, never read the Chinese newspaper especially. But God led me to pick up the Chinese newspaper, and in there I found an advertisement on a scholarship. I applied for the scholarship. Yes, I applied on my own with my hands, but God is the one who supernaturally gave me that scholarship. Just one of 3 in the whole of Singapore, God gave it to me. And that paid for all of my studies in university. So I know and learn that when I commit my plans to the Lord, He is the provider. All right? And yes, I think the other thing I learned from Moses is also in Moses' case, God didn't remove the Red Sea. He didn't just take away the Red Sea and then they can freely walk across. God left the Red Sea there, but God parted a way through the Red Sea for them. And similarly for myself, when I was young, honestly, I did ask God, why is life so unfair? God, can you take my family out of poverty? God, can you stop my father from gambling? But my prayer didn't seem to be answered. Right? I still had it tough all the way till maybe when I come out and work. But whenever I feel that, God, I don't think you're listening to me. I don't think my prayer is being answered. I always remind myself of Elizabeth and Zechariah in the Bible. Right? They were a very godly couple. They were praying for many, many years for a child, but their prayer was not answered. Right? But Elizabeth was not bitter towards God. Elizabeth continued to trust God. And one day, when the timing was right, Elizabeth conceived. And Elizabeth gave birth to John the Baptist. Right? And that's so encouraging to me because God knew the exact time, the best timing for the best plan. John needed to be born very close to Jesus' birth so that he could prepare the way for Jesus. Right? So whenever I feel that, God, what was happening, nothing is happening, I remind myself of this, that God knows the exact timing for the best plan. If John had been born any other time, John wouldn't have been able to fulfill God's bigger plan for him to prepare the way for Jesus. So I often, when I was young, yes, I prayed, it didn't get answered. And to be very honest, yes, I was embarrassed of my family background. At some moments, yes, I would say I'm ashamed sometimes, right? And it didn't help that I go to a school where many of my schoolmates and classmates, they stay in big houses, they are chauffeured to school, where I have to take my cousin's old uniform, my cousin's old school uniform and textbooks. I don't know the next day whether, or the next month, do I have money to buy bus stamp to go to school. So it's actually it's very discouraging, right? And I ask God, like, what can I do? But to some extent, I think God is telling us, if you trust that He has the best plan for you, and His plan will be the best timing, then don't worry, right? So, and I only realized that many, many years later, because, and I realized that then the hardship in my young years actually became the very reason why my father accepted the Lord. Right. So the church organized an evangelical event where they brought the Chinese congregation to a Christian concert. So I plucked up my courage and asked my father. He's quite a scary figure. Brandon should know he's quite scary. So I asked him to attend, which he attended. And after the service, I asked my dad, "Do you want to receive Jesus?" And then he said this in Cantonese. 因為我睇到你嘅神一路嚟點樣幫你，所以我相信. So what he said was, because I've seen how your God has helped you through your life, I believe. Right. So at that very, very moment, I finally understood why my prayer in my childhood wasn't answered. Because God has a better timing to answer that prayer. And that prayer, that prayer was answered. And the prayer helped answer my lifelong prayer for my father to receive his salvation. Right, so very often when I'm discouraged and my prayer seems to be unanswered, I keep remembering this. Sometimes I'll journal down some of these because when you're discouraged, it's very easy to talk about this when everything is smooth. Right, but when things are tough, it's actually very, very difficult. So I journal down some of these so that when I'm going through challenging times, I'll flip back and read and get reminded of what God's perfect timing is. Right? And I think in Moses' case, it's also quite clear that, yes, God called Moses, but God doesn't stop there. You know, God actually provided Moses very, very specific instruction what to do to actually convince the people. Right? Be it a case of throwing the staff and turning into a snake, Moses putting his hand in his cloak for it to turn into leprous skin and then converting back, Moses pouring river Nile on the ground and then turning into blood. God didn't just leave Moses, call Moses and then left Moses there. Right? God really gave Moses very, very specific instructions, and God guided Moses every step of the way. And I think that's the next thing I always remind myself to remember. Right? And the same thing, through my life, God has definitely guided me through my career. Right? Because I came from a poor family background, I tend to be more hardworking because I know I don't want the same thing to happen to my children where they worry about food, they worry about school. So when I got into work, I was really quite hardworking, right? And I was in audit, and I think Darren will know the audit hours are very, very terrible, right? So I prayed to God, can the Lord give me a more stable hours job? Because I wanted to get married, I wanted to have children, so the audit hours was really not sustainable. And I really thank God because in those days, looking for a job is not online. Looking for a job is flip the newspaper. Right, in the classified section, the job advertisements are there. So when I prayed to God for a job, and then after a while, I saw this job in a newspaper looking for a financial analyst in a global investment bank. But then they were very specific, like minimum 5 years of investment banking, financial analysis experience. So I was like, okay, I don't have any of that. But then I still felt led to apply for the job. So I sent in my application. And then, like the common term we hear nowadays, are the no sound, no picture. For very, very long, I also didn't hear anything back. So I was quite clear, I definitely didn't meet their criteria. So I was okay. But then, quite many months later, I received a phone call on a Saturday morning. Right? And the voice over the call say, can you come down for an interview within the next hour? Okay, so I rushed down. The interview was very short. Right? They had a staff who was undergoing a difficult pregnancy and she needed to stop work immediately. And they needed someone urgently. And the department head was saying, she just took out the file of all the CVs that were not shortlisted the first time and she wrote me the file. It was a very thick file. And she said, I was flipping, but I just saw your CV and I just called you. She just called me one person, right? Yes, I applied the job myself, right? My CV was not outstanding. My CV was very ordinary. But then I have an outstanding God, right? And God gave me that job. And that job then paved my way into investment banking, which was really booming at that time. Right? Because I was hardworking, when my colleagues go on leave, then I'll volunteer and say, okay, I cover your work so that I can learn what they're doing. Right? So every single of my colleagues go on holiday, I will cover their work. Up to the point when there's a big project and they needed someone who understood what the whole department did, they gave it to me, right? And from then on, I just got more and more opportunities and my career and sort of developed from there. And then God laid in my path a Christian boss, right? A Christian boss who is very godly, who is very easy to work with, and whenever he moved on to bigger roles, better firms, he has brought me along. So up to today, I've worked for him for 18 years, and I'm still working with him. Right, so the Lord is really watching over every step of our career. As long as we continue to commit it to Him, we continue to be faithful to Him, we continue to give the due credit, the due tithing back to God, God will definitely watch over the career. Right? And that sort of guided me through the years, and even when there was a financial crisis, the banking regulations tightened, investment banking was trickling. Many of my colleagues were retrenched, but the Lord kept my job. And the Lord even moved me then into another growing area, which is private fund management, where I had a job that doesn't have night calls, because in my previous job, I have a lot of night conference calls, and I think Charmaine will understand that it's very, very tough. And I felt, okay, I sometimes don't have enough time for my kids because of the calls. But God then gave me this job, local hours, still my good understanding boss, nice colleagues. I truly know that God is watching over every aspect of my career. So I know some of the young adults are actually quite stressed over the job as you start to build your career. I just want to encourage you, trust the Lord. Trust the Lord for your career. He will walk and guide you throughout. Right? And yeah, so that's my career side of things. And I'm so, like the song says, I'm so amazed by His love, because career is a big thing, but God actually is so loving that even small things, right? He cares about it. And I share with my small group, and my kids will know also, that a few months back, my helper was going back to Indonesia for good. And so me and Brendan did all we can. We look at the bio data of the new helpers, we interview, and then we pick one that we thought, okay, it looks very decent, very good, we are very happy, right? And then next morning, when I woke up, 4 words were in my head, 4 words. And I know it's not my own words because the 4 words were in my head the very, very moment I opened my eyes. Right? And the 4 words were, check her social media. So for a while, I didn't know what it is until I think I realized what God was telling me. So I took my phone. It was bizarre. I took my phone. I typed the name of my new helper into Facebook. So nothing came up. Then I typed the name of a new helper in Instagram. Nothing came up. Then I typed the name of a new helper in TikTok. And then there was one account with the exact same name because their name, the Filipino name, was like 3 very specific words. So it's very obvious. Yeah, so the account was very, very obvious. And I can still remember the moment I saw the post, my blood went cold. Right? She was very heavily made up, very skimpily dressed, dancing sexily in the video, vaping and smoking away. So I was like, okay, God, I would have taken her because I already told the agency I'm taking her. I already signed the papers. I would have taken her if God didn't want me, right? But God, even in such a small day-to-day matter, the Lord helped me, right? And I know then that the Lord cares about every single aspect of our life, even though it's small. So as long as, one quote that I like, those who leave their everything in God's hands will eventually see God's hands in their everything. And I think that really sort of, even that incident reminded me so much that sometimes we think, so small thing, better don't bother God, don't ask God. And in this case, yes, we did pray to say, God, please give us wisdom to pick a right mate, right? And we picked one that we thought in our own wisdom was very good. But God realized, and God then intervened and helped me. So I really, really thank God for His faithfulness, that when we commit everything to Him, God really has the best plan for us. It may not seem that way at that point, but God really has the best plan for us. All right? And when we are able to commit our plans to God's hand, I think the last point I want to go through is God is then able to use that to bless others. And I think God's plan in our life, helping us is one thing, but after we are helped, I think the next thing is to bless others. And my last point here is really about using what God has given to us to bless others. Sorry, I can move next slide for me. Thank you. Yeah, next one. Okay, yes. And in the Bible, this is one interest. Okay, I read in a devotion, and I like that lesson. It's in Mark 16:1, about Mary Magdalene, right? Where it says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. So the context of this passage was Jesus has just been crucified. So to Mary Magdalene, it probably was the worst and the most confusing stage in her life. Right, the one who casted the 7 demons out from her, the one who she wholeheartedly believed to be the Savior, was just brutally beaten and brutally killed. Right, so she must have been in chaotic confusion in her mind. And I can imagine that night she would have been not able to sleep. But the next day she woke up early and she decided to do what she can with her hands. So she went to collect spices with the one intention. She wanted to bless Jesus for the last time. Right? Because in those days, crucifixion, they will leave the body to decompose for the birds to devour. Right, to serve as a public warning to people around. But Jesus' crucifixion happened before the special Sabbath. They had to quickly take down Jesus' body, put it in a tomb, not properly cleaned. So Mary Magdalene wanted to use spices and just clean and anoint Jesus for the very, very last time to bless Jesus. Right, so she prepared the spices, and early in the morning, she set off to want to go to the tomb. And at that point, everyone knew that the Pharisees had put a very big stone in front of the tomb, right? So that people won't steal the body and then claim that Jesus rose from the dead. And I can imagine Mary Magdalene with the spices in her hand, with the heaviness in her heart, not knowing what she can do when she reached the tomb and the big stone is there, but she still started walking, right? And little did she know that actually as she walked, God had already moved the big stone away from the tomb. Right? God had already made a way where there seemed to be no way, when the hurdle seemed so big to be moved, but God had already moved the stone. Right? And God often teaches me the same as well. When you don't know what to do and you think that the hurdle cannot be moved, just do what you can with your hands. Just start walking step by step, because God actually will open the way for you at the right time for the right plan. Right? So if Mary Magdalene did not decide to do what she can with her hands, if she did not decide to take that step of faith to start walking towards the tomb, she would never have that amazing encounter to see the angel who tells her that Jesus has rose from the dead. She would never have been able to meet Jesus who has rose from the dead and then be able to go around and tell people about the resurrection good news of God. Right? So because Mary did that step of using what she can with her hands and then taking the step of faith. And same when we feel stressed, like how God told Moses, don't focus on the anxiety. Right? Look at what you have in your hands. Look at what is in front of you. Don't worry. Sometimes you worry so much about 10 years later, what is going to happen. But like what Moses did, what Mary did, focus on what you can in your hands. Take the first step and God will do the rest. Right? And Mary's Magdalene intent was the one that got blessed. Mary Magdalene's intent was to bless Jesus. And the same for all of us here. If we use what we can with our hands to bless others, God will really use it in a very big way. Right? And yes, I've been here for 41 years. From primary 1, I got to know the Lord through a primary 1 school teacher. And I happened to have a classmate who was attending Maranatha Sunday School. Right? And she invited me to come to Sunday school, and I came. And all I can say is, I'm standing here today because of the faithfulness of so many people in the church here. Right? We had no parents to send us to church last time, but we had very faithful Sunday school helpers, one of them being Vernie's brother, Carol Deborah, Sister Alice, Linda's brother. They sacrifice their Sunday morning every Sunday, rain or shine. They'll come under our flat and pick us up. And then they'll wait for us to attend the whole Sunday school, finish, then they'll send us back home, back to our flat. Every single Sunday, every year, rain or shine. Right? They sacrifice their sleep, they sacrifice their own time. And Sunday school teachers, Brother Lai Liang, Sister Gina, Sister Vernie, week on week, we were very naughty. Every time they put those fannel, the picture, they will turn it upside down, we will take down. But they were very faithful to teach us every single week. And I would say honestly, if I didn't have this, I probably wouldn't be believing God today, and maybe wouldn't even be in the church, right? And so the church Maranatha has been with me ups and downs through my life. In my JC prom night, prom night we have to dress up, right? So I was very poor. I could only afford a very simple white plain dress. So I bought a simple white plain dress, while my friends will go to tailor-make their gowns. They'll go to the expensive shopping place to buy a dress. And one of the church brothers got to know about it, and he took my dress, and then he hand-sewed embellishments onto my dress, and then gave me back a one-in-the-world dress that only I have. Right? It was a very simple thing to him because he studied wedding fashion, right? But the simple gesture of just taking something from me and then giving something beautiful to me with something he could do with his hands, just really showed me the wonderful love that the church can have. And as I moved on to uni, and some of the sisters knew that I couldn't really afford. So some of them pulled me after one Sunday service quietly, one of them being Sister Li Peng, and asked and wanted to share some or give me some money because they think that they can help me, right? They have a job, they have stable income, they want to help me. So all of these small things that really just touch my life, right? My first aeroplane flight, not like the kids nowadays, 2-3 years old, they take aeroplane flight. I think my first aeroplane flight, about 20 years old or 21, was sponsored by church members, right? Who kindly sponsored me to go on a church camp, a mission camp that was overseas. So I will never forget all these things that the church has done for me, right? And during the accident in Genting, when we were in the hospital, I was all alone in KL because Brandon had to fly back for his surgery. And yeah, so Pastor David, Sister Biha, Sister Jenny, Brother Jonathan, they flew up to KL, right? They brought sanitizer, they brought me Bible, they brought me a big soft toy for Jillian. You know, they were just there to make sure I eat and I drink, because I really couldn't eat, I really couldn't drink. But they were just there beside me, praying for me, making sure I eat, and looking after us. And these are things that, you know, it's not, I really cannot take for granted. Right? Have I ever considered switching church? Have I ever considered not attending church? Yes, I have. I have. But is this love from the church through the years that has allowed me to say, yes, I want to continue serving the Lord. I want to continue giving to the church because of the love that God has given. Right? Even in the whole 2 months we were in the hospital, in those days there isn't a WhatsApp group, the Zoom. So Sister Fei Fong will call her mobile, she'll call me, and then she'll put on speaker mode and let me hear how the church was praying for Gillian and Brandon week after week. Right? And all these just reinforce in my mind that, yes, we don't despise what we have in our hands. We commit our plans to the Lord will guide us. And then the next step is to use what we have in our hands to bless others. Right? And I just want to encourage those of us here sometimes, especially those who are serving. Right? It's sometimes very tiring, or like you have a day job, it's not easy. But all I want to say is that simple act of love. Even if you're not serving, you could come to church and you're just giving a smile to a newcomer or giving a smile to another church member. That very simple act of love could be the very reason why that brother or sister is still believing in God today, and why that brother or sister has not given up on Jesus. So I would like to just encourage all of us to continue to be a vessel of God's blessing to all around. And even as I end my sharing today, I just like to encourage all of us to reflect upon your life and ask yourself, what has God put in my hands? Can I commit what I have that God has given me and trust that God has the best plan for me? And how can I use what I have to bless others? If we can really think through on these questions and really ask God to touch you and tell you and teach you how He can use you, no matter how small, as we offer what we have to God in faith, God can really use whatever that we are giving to Him in a very big way. So I really pray, it's really my prayer that I myself continue to really ask myself these questions. And I really pray as well that these questions will be one that you could ask, and that God can really be speaking to you and challenging you to do something that will be very wonderful for the Lord.